Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 2020 version of the Logic App Live. We haven't done this in a while. In fact, this is the first time we're doing this since the pandemic started. So, this is all new with the remote technologies that we're using. So, bear with us as we figure this out. And we hope you will like what we are showing in the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. So to get started, let's do a quick round of intro for everyone who is on the call. My name is Derek Lee. I'm a program manager working at Agile Logic Apps, and I focus on the workflow designer and various aspects of the developer experience, such as VS Code. Today, I'm joined with John and Divya. So why don't we start with you, John?
Yeah, hi, I'm John Fancy. I am also a PM on the Logic Apps team. So thanks, Derek. And I will just say, we've been really trying to get to doing another one of these all year. I'm sure it's the same for everybody. That just feels like this year's racing by, and it's been a strange one. So we're really looking forward to kind of sharing with you what we kind of announced earlier this week, and giving you the chance to ask these questions and talk about it.
And Divya.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. I'm very excited to be here as well. And I'm a PM in Logic Apps team, like Derek. My key areas of focus are business verticals, integration account, EDI capabilities, and overall connector ecosystem.
All right, let's get started. So I'll hand it over to you, John.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah, so what we normally do, I say normally, what we used to do is give you a recap of everything since last time. Because it's been so long, and honestly, as you'll see, and as some of you are no doubt aware, this year we've really focused a lot on what we talked about at Ignite earlier this week. So we kind of went dark, and we're really sorry about that, and we'll try to stop that from happening again. But what we did want to do is just give you a recap of some of the most recent things that you may have missed. Because some of these have been asks that you've made yourselves, and just make sure that we kind of call these things out and you know that they're there. So let's just quickly run through them. I think that probably the top one, and it's the first one on the list, is the OAuth request trigger that a lot of people have asked for quite a while. And we got that out relatively recently, allowing you to use OAuth authentication on the request trigger when you trigger a Logic app. Related to that, the second thing, which people immediately ask for, is like, okay, I actually want to see the authorization header that comes through from that OAuth authorization, because I actually may have some claims in that I want to validate. So we've enabled that as well. And this one literally went out like last week. There's it's code view only. So you have to kind of switch and make that change on the request trigger definition, but that's there as well. If you actually don't want us to strip out the authorization header, which is kind of the default behavior, as you see, the HTTP header filtering that we do is default behavior, and you can turn that off now. The third one is around managed service identities. We've increased the limits. Again, it's great that when you give us feedback, because we get a new feature out there, and we're looking forward to what you tell us this week, given everything we've released, that the immediate reaction is, this is great, but we need more. So this is one of those where we've increased the limits to allow you to have more managed service identities when you're using Logic apps. We get it. We know you have a lot of connections. We know you need to manage this stuff. So we've increased it significantly. The next one is around renaming actions that has dependency. This is another one I think we've all ourselves wanted for a long time as well. It's just super annoying if you get very good at switching to code view and making these changes, and now you don't have to. You can actually do the renames on actions that have dependencies. Previously, we blocked that, and now we don't. Next one, Switzerland North. How you doing, everybody listening or watching this in Switzerland? We just launched the data center there. I know there's a number of customers based in Switzerland who really wanted this. So Logic Apps is available for your use now as well. And the final one is making integration service environments available in the US National Cloud as well, for those of you who that's relevant for. We've just lit that up as well. Okay, and of course, there's always new connectors. This is often the thing we focus on the most, simply because there's just a huge number of connectors. We have nearly 400 connectors for Logic Apps now, actually, just in aggregate. But one of the other things the connectors team's been doing is open sourcing a bunch of them. There's over 100 now that have been open sourced that you can take a look at and actually see how they work. and hopefully help us improve them. We now have Azure AD authentication for the SQL connector as well. That was another, really popular ask that we're glad we managed to get to for you as well. So you have more options when you're using SQL Server for using AD-based authentication for that, no longer just the SQL Auth or Windows Auth for that. And the final one is being able to bring your own keys for some of the connectors. I don't know if you have the list off the top of your head, Derek. I know this is always one of those where your favorite connector probably doesn't have it. We're going to keep adding to these to give you, unblock you if you have connectors that you need this control over with your own API keys for the connectors you want to use. Okay, right. Now, this is what we're going to do now is kind of really give you a roundup of everything we've announced this week at Ignite on Tuesday, and then Derek session on Wednesday at Ignite, and give you the opportunity to kind of ask us questions around this. This is really the purpose of this, is to give, let you tell us what you think. But we just want to go through it all. And I'll just run through the list that we have. Hopefully you're aware, we have a new Logic Apps runtime, which is being containerized. And we've optimized that to run on top of functions, which means you can now run Logic Apps as part of App Service. You get all the goodness that ecosystem accrues, private endpoints, slots, and other things as part of being able to do that. And of course, we know that Logic Apps and functions together is a super common scenario. So we have done some work in this release to make that an even better set of capabilities, but we know we need to do more, and we have more planned there to really make Logic Apps and functions just work great together. The next one is probably the most obvious change, where as soon as you create a new Logic App, is the new designer, and Derek's going to show both of these two things in a second. But we're super pleased about this. We are not done. Again, we have lots in our roadmap here, and again, would love to see your feedback on this as well. But we've given it a sort of a new look. We've optimized for space. As we've seen over time, your Logic Apps are just getting longer, and you need more space to be able to see them to minimize the amount of scrolling that you do. And that's what we've done in this first release, is giving you that capability so that you now have a panel that slides out from the side, allowing you to configure each of the steps in your Logic App. Which gives you a lot more space and a more compact design on the left-hand side when you actually look at all the colored boxes that you put together as part of your workflow. The next one, which Divya is going to talk about, is API connections as a service, and she's going to show this as well. This is the ability to be able to use all of the Logic Apps connectors from Azure Functions. So you can create one connection and now use it across both Logic Apps and functions, giving you access in functions to write code against those connections. And again, really kind of blending these things together so that you can write code when you need to and use the declarative visual style of Logic Apps to add productivity to the scenarios you're implementing. The next one is automation tasks. This is kind of interesting because this is an Azure portal-wide feature. So automation tasks gives you the ability to actually create tasks in the Azure portal that kind of automate common things against resources that you have. And then the final one is the BizTalk migration tooling, which we will talk about later as well. That is not quite released yet. We're just jumping through some hoops on that to get that released, because that is going to be open source. So there's a few checks we'll do before we send that out. And I will just mention, just actually before we move on, that the whole team is here as well to answer questions in chat. So we have Valerie, Rob, and Chris Hauser as well, who are keeping an eye on the chat windows. So and Valerie's PMing the BizTalk migration tooling. So feel free to fire away on questions as we go through this. So coming soon, yeah, more regions. This never stops either, just a bit like connectors. So we have Germany North and Germany West Central coming, as well as new regions we're lighting up very soon. And what else? So let's do a deeper dive on the runtime and then look at a demo. So as I mentioned, Logic Apps is now being containerized, which means it's rehostable. You can run it anywhere that you can manage your functions, which is a lot of places, nearly everywhere. And we're actually doing more work to make that as easy as we can going forward as well. So you really do kind of get this write once, run anywhere experience, which we're aiming for with Logic Apps. Being able to run workflows on the edge or on premises, we know is, again, a very common scenario for a lot of you. We want to make that as easy as possible and use the same tooling, the same gestures to enable that, which is why we've shipped a new VS Code extension to make that super easy to be able to do that. And then there's stateless workflows, because one of the other pieces of feedback we heard was around performance, particularly request response performance, which is what stateless workflow is optimized for. So there are some limitations with this, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But what you'll see is the primary trigger we expect you to use, and the one we've lit up for stateless workflows, is the HTTP request trigger, because we know that you want straight line performance, being able to do a few steps, relatively short running compared with stateful logic apps can run for up to a year. You want to do something quick. You want to go to a backend data source, or maybe 2 or 3, aggregate the results and send it back and expose that logic app as an API. And maybe you want to actually consume that API from applications you're building, or even using the Dapper integration that we have, use logic apps as part of that as well with Azure Functions, which also has Dapper support now, to be able to build microservice orchestrated applications and integrations using logic apps and all the power of the connectors that we have. Then we have local development, of course. That's what the VS Code enables. So when you install this and you set up the storage emulator, you can literally create, author, and run a logic app on your local dev box, which is, again, been a long-term ask, and it's super exciting to see the feedback we've had already on this. And then the functions integration, which I mentioned, and of course, it's public preview. So if you haven't tried it out already, please do, and please let us know what you think. Let's move on to the designer. So as I mentioned, there's a few things that you can see, the very obvious changes visually. There's a few things you can't see. One of them is we're switching to a better layout engine, which is going to give you a lot more control and therefore a lot more features in terms of what you can do in terms of the layout of your logic apps and gestures around kind of being able to see an overview of your logic apps and better control over drag and drop and various other gestures to reorganize logic apps when you're authoring them. So a lot of work that we're going to do there. But again, we're really happy to be able to get out this latest designer release with everything that we have so far, because it actually adds a lot of productivity with the new panel for the configuration, allowing you to see more of your logic app steps without the scrolling that I mentioned. So more of what you care about on the canvas itself with less of the scroll bars, and optimized for logic apps as they get larger and larger. So with that, I think I'll hand over to you, Derek, and why don't you show us what it looks like?
All right, sounds good. Thanks, John. And hello, everyone. So what I'm gonna do is just start in VS Code. So here you can see under the Azure tab, we have a new Logic App extension that is just shipped to the marketplace. We're calling it Logic App Preview at the moment. What this allows you to do is I can create a new local project, which I have already done. So, but I can also create a new workflow in that local project. Like John mentioned, we now have 2 flavors of workflows. We have the stateful workflow that you have gotten to know over the years, and we're introducing a new stateless version of the workflow that is very high performant. And from there, you can then deploy that to Azure or manage it. Since I already have one, I'm going to show it here. So here I have a stateful workflow already created. I can choose to open that in Designer. Now, what's really cool about this is everything is running locally on my machine. So you can see that we're actually starting a local runtime on my dev box, so I don't have to go to the cloud to be able to interact with my designer. Now, what you will also see here on the designer is the new layout John had mentioned. The card looks much smaller right now. I think it looks much better, and it's using the space much more efficiently. So from here on in the designer, I can then add actions, just like I'm able to do in the past, but then I'm doing this in the panel, right? The idea is we want to separate the canvas, which is used to render your workflow and action dependencies, away from the configuration of each action. So here I can say, let me add a condition. And here a condition action is added, and you can see again the condition action looks a little bit different than what you are seeing today. We are highlighting the difference between the two branches, true and false. You can collapse them individually, and when you collapse it, you can see how many actions are there inside each branch before you choose to expand. Like in this case, I don't really have to. So I think that's really cool. And let's just keep adding actions. We have added a few more. Until is another one of my favorite. So the until action in Logic App is actually a do until. Right? So actions within the do until loop will run at least once before the exit conditions are evaluated. Now we have updated the visual to better communicate that behavior. So you see the do, you see the actions that you can add within, and then you see the until exit condition configuration. Now, since I'm choose to add an action, I think it's a good time to show you a new connector among many ones that we are shipping that we're really excited about, and that's the Azure Communication Service connector. So with Azure Communication Service connector, I'm now able to send a text message from right within my Logic app. So we have a send SMS action. I have the connection already created, but I can choose to send email from the phone number that I have acquired as part of using that service, and I can choose to send that email to one or many customers. You can see that's an array, so I can actually send it to multiple people. I can choose to have the message in the content that I want. I can reference tokens if needed. I can even have a delivery report just to make sure that the message got to the recipient, and the delivery report is going to come back via event grid, so I can have another logic app if I choose to do so that subscribe to that particular topic and know how the delivery had worked. Let me show you a few other things here. So for each loop, again, looks a little bit different. Um, Here's another thing I want to show you. So let me expand this action. One thing that we added is in the about page, which I like a lot. So here inside the about page, we're showing you which connector this comes from, the description of the connector, a link to point you to the documentation page so you can learn more, and any tags this connector may have. In this case, it is a preview connector. I find this particularly useful for connectors such as Office 365 and Outlook. Um, both of the connector have a send email action, and very often you can't tell after you add an action which connector it is coming from. But with the about page, you will be able to clearly see, oh, this connector is coming from Outlook 365, whereas other ones are coming from Outlook.com. So I like this a lot. Give this a try and let us know your feedback. So just like I'm able to run the designer locally, I'm also able to run the runtime locally. I'm not going to do this now for sake of time. We have a few more demos that we have planned, but this is in public preview at the moment. So I encourage you to download the VS Code extension and give the public preview of the new Logic App runtime a try and see what feedback you have for us. And with that, let's switch back to the slides.
Great. Thanks, Derek. Right. The next thing let's talk about and have a look at is API connections as a service. This is pretty interesting, actually, for those of you who are functions users as well as Logic Apps users, or maybe functions users and not Logic Apps users, because a lot of people want to be able to have more flexibility in the connectors and how they're used from other environments. So for functions, we've enabled you to be able to now create that connection to a connector and then code against the connection in an Azure function. We've given you access to hundreds of pre-built APIs. Essentially, all the connectors that we have are implemented as APIs. And this is just being released in private preview. And we are not charging for this during private preview, but I will note that we are throttling it in terms of rate throughput so that we kind of see how it goes and we understand your usage patterns, and then hopefully we'll be expanding that and reducing the throttles over time. So, I'll just call that out in case you hit those and get the dreaded 429s, and just let us know and we can take a look and again, tell us what you think and what you're doing with it. And I think with that, Divya, you're going to show it, right?
Yes, let's move on to the demo and see this in action. Let I'm sharing my screen now.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. Well, I just want to start with the problem that we are trying to solve here, and I think John has given a great introduction to it. But just to go a little bit deeper into it, for Logic Apps customers, what the workflow you see here is very common pattern, right? We are used to integrating to multiple services, and when you do that, you are totally focusing on the business problem that you're trying to solve. You do not think that what time, what effort would it take for you to integrate, to authenticate with these services? Do they have the documentation for you to understand how to use their APIs? All of that is not required. You are completely focused on your business problem that you're trying to solve. But that's not the case when similar kind of applications are being attempted to build through code. And I think that's what we are trying to do here. We want to converge that gap. We want to bring these services together in a way that you have the same experience, you have the similar experience even when you're writing the code, so that you're not spending time writing the boilerplate code, and you can directly use these services because we have already solved this problem. So why keep it to one product? We want to expand it to our entire serverless ecosystem. Uh, for Logic Apps, if you have used it, like for the workflow that I was showing you, behind the scenes, in order to integrate with those services, we create connections. And in the process of creating the connections, you are basically authorizing with that service. All of that happens with a few clicks of button. Now we are bringing all of that to Azure Functions as well. Let's see how that works. So for this workflow, I have three connections here, and I want to start with VS Code here. And the first problem that we are trying to solve, which is probably one of the more complex problems, is that there are no standard ways of authenticating with a lot of services out there. The documentation is not, the documentation is scarce. Even if it's available, it's hard to understand. Samples are not there. So what we are releasing to solve that problem is a VS Code extension for API connections. And this is an extension for API connections. So it can be used for both Logic Apps and Azure Functions. So as you can see, I have this resource group here, which I was showing you on the portal, and it had three connections. I have all the three connections available here as well. So to get started, I could simply use these connections, and I'll show you in my Azure Functions code. But first, let's see how this works. I'm going to create a new connection just to show you the flow of how this looks like. So let's create a new connection, choose my resource group, and then I'm going to use Office 365 connector, give a name to the API connection. So now the connection is being created for you. Since it's an OAuth connector, we need to consent, and it's using my identity. I am going to allow access, and now I'm back to VS Code. The authorization is complete, and the connection has been created for me. This is the one that I used. And the next step would be for you to use this connection to use in your code. In order to do that, you simply have to generate the connection string. Now, we have two options here, but managed identity is what we recommend and is more secure, is probably preferred by most of the folks out there. So I'm also going to use a managed identity here, and I have it on my clipboard. So now I'm ready to use it in my code. Now let's move to the code itself. So here is my Azure Functions project, and I'm just before I do that, let me just show you the csproj file. So what we have done is we have built SDKs for each of these connectors, and now you have an option to reference these SDKs in your projects. You have right now I'm referencing the two SDKs for the two connectors I have in my project individually, but we are going to have the package which has all the connectors as well. since it's going to be huge, we leave it up to you. What is your preference? Whether you want to have all the Uber package, or you can choose to use the individual connectors. Now, once I have the reference, I can simply use the APIs from the SDK that I'm referencing in my code. So here I'm trying to use the Teams connector. And I think one of the things that you would love about this is that all the lack of standard practices and the lack of docs is something that you don't have to worry about here, because we now have a consistent way to create these connectors. So for every connector, all you have to do is use the API for that connector and do a create operation and provide the managed identity that we just created from the VS Code extension. And once you have the managed identity, you can basically call any of the APIs from there. So let me just show you the IntelliSense that you get with this. So for this, I have Teams connector, and then I can simply choose any of the APIs here that I want to use. And for example, I use this. It shows you all the parameters. It shows you what they look like, and you can get this again from the APIs that we are providing through the SDK. So this is a very streamlined and a consistent way to integrate with one or many services. That's what the goal here is, that even from the code, your time to integrate with multiple services should not increase proportionally to the number of services it should remain constant, and that's the hope that it will bring to you. So the next connector that I'm using here is the cognitive services connector. And again, I followed the similar steps where I've created the connector, and then I'm using the APIs available for that connector. Here it's the sentiment analysis API that I'm using. So basically what this app is doing is it's getting messages from my Teams channel and doing a sentiment analysis on them. So let's run this. And this is going to take some time, but I think the whole idea is that whatever you can do with Logic Apps, you're doing the same thing here with very few lines of code, without uh, having to spend a lot of time to figure out what the APIs are. Are the APIs in your preferred language? Are there any samples to create this? With the IntelliSense, with the SDK that we have, you don't even, in most cases, you wouldn't even need that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Divya, and it's often overlooked. I think it's very easy to say, well, it's just an API. I can just make an HTTP call to it and just look at the docs for the API I'm calling, whether it's Salesforce or Twitter or whatever else. But it kind of gets boring once you do that 20 times across 20 different APIs, and you need to keep your code up to date when the APIs change, and you need to understand the idiosyncrasies of some of the APIs that we're wrapping up in the connectors. It makes it a lot simpler that we kind of take care of that for you, and that's really the value prop here, and giving that to you when you're using functions as well.
All right. Let's see. This worked before here. Okay. I'm going to try it one more time, and if it doesn't, well, you got the idea. This is in private preview, so we are still working on it. There are deployments happening probably as I'm doing the demo. So I'll get this. I have the endpoint here, and I have the MSI here. All right, let's run it one more time. And while this is going on, this is the stuff that is in private preview. We will be sharing the link to sign up. And we will be reaching out to everyone by end of this week or by early next week with instructions on how to get access to both the VS Code extension as well as the SDKs for the connectors. Let's try it one more time.
Thanks for all your questions in the chat window, by the way. Keep them coming. I may have missed a few, so feel free to post them again. But yeah, I'm trying to get through them all.
Right. All right, yeah, so it was successful this time. I had a tweet and it scored, it calculated the sentiment for that tweet and giving back the result. So yeah, that's all from API connections. And yeah, once again, I would love if you can sign up for it and get provide your feedback to us. Anything in terms of what kind of scenarios you think this is useful for, or any what we are missing, experience, features, anything that you have feedback on. Would love to hear that. Right, over to you, Derek.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Divya. Back to the slides. I forgot to apologize for any background noise you can hear, by the way. I've got some people here with some hammers. It's all right. I know who they are, and I let them in, but just in case you hear anything, that's what it is. Okay, let's talk about automation tasks, and then we'll take a look at this as well. As I mentioned earlier, automation tasks is interesting because it basically brings logic apps to every Azure portal user, and there are millions of those, without putting the kind of learning curve in front of them to be able to actually use logic apps. So what we've done is, against pretty much all the resources that you have in Azure, we have a set of standard templates and then curated templates for particular resources where they make sense, like VMs, where you can very simply use a wizard to create a task. Maybe you want to start and stop a VM at certain points of the day. Maybe you want to clean up blob storage on a certain time schedule. Maybe you want to know how much some things are costing to run. All of these things are possible with automation tasks. And we've open sourced the templates as well, so you can see how they work, and you can even contribute your own as well. It's something we're looking at so that you can enhance this. Super easy to create, and I think you had a lot of interest from teams across Azure in actually creating their own templates as well. This is in public preview too, but the easiest way to kind of understand what it is and how Logic Apps powers this is honestly just to see it. So I think, Derek, why don't you
All right, I think we are back.
let me just confirm
Yes.
that.
Yes,
We are.
Cool.
We are.
Well, like I said from the beginning, this is the first time we're doing this, so things happen. Okay, let's continue with the demo.
I would probably start again, Derek. I think we lost it pretty soon after you switched to the demo.
Sounds good. All right, so yeah, I was talking about automation tasks and the way you would go about using it. Here I have a Cosmos DB instance. I will find a task entry on the table of contents. I will simply click on that, and then I can create a new one. So when creating an automation task, you choose from a predefined template. So here for Cosmos DB, we have two. One is to get an email every month at the end of the month on how much this resource is costing me to run. Alternatively, I'm going to choose the second one to just send me a query via email that it's going to be executed on a regular schedule. The next thing I will do is to authenticate. Just like I would do with Logic Apps, I have to sign in so Logic App knows how to talk to these different services. I have already done that beforehand, so I can speak forward to the configuration tab. Now in configurations, I have to tell it a bit more information on how I want it to behave. The time zone, the interval, and the frequency I want to run my query. which database and collection I want it to run, and where I want to send an email to, and obviously, most importantly, what is the query I want to run. So I have the task already created. Let me just show you here. I'm simply doing a select all from the collection. I want to do this every day at midnight Pacific time. And I can show you the email that I got. Here is the email that I get every day. So that is automation tasks. Like John mentioned, this is in public preview. The templates are open sourced, and we're working with partners within Microsoft to add more templates so that you have a good selection of templates to choose from for your scenarios. But I'm also encourage you to start thinking about what template you want and give us feedback, or even better, contribute to the template, which is open source on GitHub. So together we build a richer experience for everyone. And that is automation tasks. Cool. So let's switch back to the slide.
Right. So the final thing we're going to talk about is BizTalk migrations. We're seeing an increasing number of customers who really want to be able to move into Azure, and honestly, given the flexibility we're offering now with the new runtime, even remaining on premises and being able to run integration workloads there as well as in the cloud. So what we are literally just getting ready to release is a BizTalk migration tool that will be open sourced out there on GitHub. You'll be able to have a look at it and see how it works, and hopefully contribute to it and help us improve it. We know that BizTalk has an enormous surface area, some of which we have in Azure as well, of course, and we're constantly making that more true over time. But we really would love your help and feedback as well in terms of what gaps or areas you think we should be prioritizing based on the types of BizTalk applications that you have or your customers have, or ones that you want to move. But just kind of quickly, what the tool does is it will allow you to take any supported version of BizTalk from 2013 R2 onwards. We've actually, this is what we've got a full kind of test suite for. We've actually had customers already try it on BizTalk 2010 as well. And later, so anything from 2010 onwards, and it seems to work just the same. Just we haven't tested those out of support versions of BizTalk. So it will be in public preview really soon. We hope within the next week or so. And I think there's another slide which goes into the details a bit more. Yeah. So what can it do? Well, the way it works is that you can export a BizTalk application as an MSI file and run the tool against it. It will parse it out. It will build a model of all the BizTalk artifacts that are there and generate a complete web-based HTML report showing you what it found. It only supports the file FTP and HTTP adapter, but when you, as you'll see when you look at the source code, it's going to be pretty easy to add additional ones. The one area we're noodling on is how we add support and mapping, if you like, for WCF, because there's no direct equivalent, although we have connectors for things like SAP and other things. So how to best do the mapping between those. But file FTP and HTTP are super common, as I'm sure you're aware, in BizTalk apps. It does provide support for the out-of-the-box BizTalk pipelines, XML receive and transmit, and pass-through receive and transmit, as well as doing, and this is really where we've focused most of the effort on all the messaging patterns that you can do with BizTalk, because again, that's so prevalent. And it's the kind of the piece that you can't see in terms of the artifacts you're creating, because it's the configuration of the interchanges and interactions between them in the messaging engine, the message box in BizTalk. So we focused on things like the publish subscribe patterns, which map onto service bus and event grid for triggering logic apps, for property promotions and demotions in the pipelines, for putting maps on the ends of the receive and send ports, as well as all the kind of standard disassembly components for XML and JSON and flat file as well. And we've also added support for orchestration. This is a work in progress. So what it will do is convert orchestrations to logic apps with placeholders for the shapes that we haven't currently completely implemented. But interestingly, you know, the final bullet is actually worth a mention as well. What we've done is essentially shipping a set of standard logic apps that implement a lot of the patterns that we see in BizTalk usage over the past sort of 10 plus years. So essentially those message-based pub-sub interactions with BizTalk, and created generic logic apps that implement a lot of that. And then essentially your converted application takes advantage of those by putting logic apps and configuration on top of that. So from a BizTalk application, which is a combination of things, right, from adapters mapping onto connectors, to maps and schemas mapping onto the equivalents in the integration accounts, to logic apps, which is mapped from orchestration and APIs and API management to kind of glue all this together. We actually do an architectural conversion as well as an absolute resource conversion of what we find in the BizTalk applications to what you have in Azure Integration Services. As I said, it's very much a kind of V.1, and we, again, love to see what you think and where you think we should be prioritizing our effort. We do think we've done a pretty good job in terms of always generating a report because we have the complete object model for BizTalk. But tell us what we should be doing with this tool. Tell us how it's working out for you, and it's something we would love to take your feedback on as we kind of work through this kind of public preview. And carry on enhancing the tool kind of in front of everybody in open source, and hopefully seeing some of you contributing to it as well. It's a circular saw now, in case you're wondering. Okay, and just a quick screenshot of the report. We really want to demo this. The trouble is it takes a while to run, as you can imagine. Kind of the exportation process, and then kind of running the tool, and then kind of generating a report. It takes about 20 minutes. So for those of you who are interested, please feel free to reach out directly to us. We're happy to kind of do a deeper dive on this. And of course, when we release the tool, we'll be broadcasting that out through the usual channels, so you can download it and try it for yourselves. Okay, so what's next? Well, we're not done. We never are. There's a few things that didn't quite make the cut for this release. So what we're figuring out at the moment is the release cadence. We are planning a preview refresh round about November time. So for those of you in the US, just before Thanksgiving, because it's really our last opportunity before the end of the year, given it's the busiest period for a lot of customers. We typically avoid the period between Thanksgiving and January. And then as we're kind of marching on towards GA next year. So what we are going to be adding is more features to that preview refresh. And then the other side of this, obviously addressing your feedback, which is the other side of this, which is bug fixes. And a few people have asked in the chat already, and I know it's still scrolling past and we need to get to your questions, around what about Mac support? What about this? What about that? Integration accounts, whatever. Some of those we're treating as bug fixes, like support for Mac, and we are actively working right now. And Derek and I are super motivated on this one because we're both running a Macs. So we kind of help with the team kind of get all this working and doing some testing, and it nearly works. It's really close. So we're going to be pushing out bug fixes as we fix stuff and as you report it as quickly as we can. We're not going to wait for a big kind of release or refresh. We want to get the bug fixes out to you as quickly as possible. So please report them, send them directly to us, whatever's easiest for you, and we'll address those bugs as we go. And then we'll be adding more features in the preview refresh. And then next year we'll be hopefully GAing this thing. Okay, so please get involved. I think we need to put the link for the API connection sign up, Divya, in the chat if you haven't already. I think somebody asked that question a few minutes ago. I was just looking for it before the whole thing kind of crashed on us. Actually, it's right there. What am I talking about? So I think Mikhail or somebody asked that question. That's the link. Might be worth putting in the chat as well, so you can cut and paste it. But that's for API connections. What else have we got? And yeah, please try out the new features. I know there's some MVPs here. Some people have had access to the pre-release bits. Huge thanks to all of you for sending us feedback and trying things out and testing and really helping make this as good a release as it possibly can be. We'd ask you to tell us what you think. Spread the word if you love it. or if you hate it, let us know. We're keeping a very close eye kind of what's going on. There's been a lot of people writing blog posts around this in terms of the capabilities that it now provides, and it's really exciting to see all of the things you're thinking about, because it's really helping us sort of plan out and think about what's important for you so that we can optimize for that, and add stuff that you need us to add. So it helps us, give you what you need. So as always, go to aks.ms, Logic Apps feedback to share that with us as well. And with that, I think we've got a bunch of questions. Should we start going through that?
Yeah, I will take the first one from Michael. Question for VS Code, does the workflow.json compile down to DLL, which is deployed, or is it just logic app JSON? So yeah, it's the latter. So the workflow JSON is interpreted at runtime, just like it is today in the consumption SKU of logic apps, so that we can ensure a very consistent experience and behavior that allows you to bring your logic app at some point that is running today into this new runtime without having to do much work and know that it will behave exactly the same way it has been. So yep, that's that.
Yeah, I'm just looking as well. Horizontal designer. I think we tried that already.
So I would say with the designer, John mentioned earlier that we are moving to a new layout engine, and the layout engine is actually quite powerful, and we are still just figuring out and brainstorming about all the things we can do with it. One thing that we really want to be able to leverage is just use the space more efficiently, and I think that's what's really behind requests like, oh, I want to see my workflow horizontally because I have a ultra wide monitor. So we'll see how we can address those concerns, but ideally there should be very few white space that you see on your canvas when you have a big workflow, and we can very efficiently use that and show you on a high level of what that workflow it is like that you are building. So. And we'll be running more user studies as we work on this new designer. So keep an eye out on our Twitter page for MVPs. Take a look at the Yammer channel. Definitely participate and let us know your feedback so we can incorporate that in the design and development of the new designer.
There's more questions popping up now. So how is pricing going to work? I think I started to answer that earlier in the chat, so you may want to have a kind of look back actually as well. But essentially, we want you to tell us. We have a few ideas of our own. I shared those earlier in the chat. Essentially, where we're heading towards is kind of obvious, right? Is that Logic App Runtime is essentially a capability that consumes resources like compute and storage, which are portable. So you'll be able to run Logic Apps on premises using compute and storage. That's why you can do local dev with the Azure Storage Emulator. We are looking at removing dependency as quickly as we can for stateless workflows, so you have no storage dependency at all. That's a little bit of work we're doing right now, but also looking ahead to actually being able to run stateful workflows in other places as well by removing the dependency in Azure Storage. But essentially, when you look at, we've talked about this before in terms of Azure Arc and what that team is doing and how they're lighting up data services like SQL. We think there's a lot of opportunity there for us as well. So it's worth having a look at their kind of business model that they've talked about as well in terms of, I think they have made some announcements at Ignite this week too. So we're figuring this out. If I'm completely honest, we are not locked on this. We are looking at what makes sense and listening to how you think it should be. I think Michael Stevenson made a couple of suggestions earlier, which do make sense to us. Because if you're going to run this yourselves in your own Kubernetes cluster, wherever it is, then that's a different kind of how do you expect to pay for that versus running it as a consumption service as you do today in Azure. And we want to be consistent, and our principles are really around consistency across environments or where you're running it, and simplicity, right? That We don't want to introduce some crazy, huge, complex model that is impossible to figure out, even with a pricing calculator, what it's going to cost. So tell us what you think. We really value that as we work towards locking this. This is honestly the reason why we didn't talk about, is often the case, with public previews, we release the kind of pricing that you'll expect from GA, which is why there's no kind of cost to run Logic Apps right now. You're literally just paying for the compute to run it on. So you run it in Azure on top of one of the functions premium SKUs, and that's all you're paying for right now. So we are working on it, and we will come back to you later with more to say. But do tell us what you think and what you think is going to work best for you. Sorry, it's a long answer. What else do we have? Some questions about EDI scenarios. Divya, I don't know whether you want to talk about that one in terms of our plans.
Yeah, I think the question was around mapper capabilities. So I think probably there are two aspects to it. One is that we are the VS 2015 support for EIP tools is, and you've been asking for the more latest VS support. That is something that is planned, and we will be working on it. I don't have an exact ETA, but it's planned for this year sometime. And then the second question is in generally probably around a better mapper. That is somewhat more long term. We recognize that this is something that we need to provide to the customers, but we've not yet got a chance to get to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to kind of explain that a bit further in terms of the way we're kind of planning out the next release, this preview refresh, is we're going to set a date. And I've already told you which month it's in, so we're just trying to figure out which day in that month, and then we're going to figure out how much we can get in to that date, right? And then we'll release more later, right? We expect more features to ship at that date. Hopefully, what Divya just mentioned will make the cut to be in that release, and then GA, you expect more features again. We are working super hard now and almost accelerating what we're doing here, because we know, when we do this, we kind of implicitly kind of introduce gaps that we want to close as quickly as possible. So we're working on that. But your feedback helps prioritize that. I know we keep saying it, but it's true. So there's a question from Mike, which I was looking at a minute ago. I lost it.
While you're looking for it, I will take a few. There's a question on the inline code support for C#. Well, so a few things. I want to mention inline. Thanks for the reminder about inline code. With the new Logic App Runtime, we have made some improvements to inline code, even for JavaScript, and most noticeably is the removal of integration account requirements, right? So today, when you use inline code, you have to link that with an integration account, and that is no more. So as long as you are using the new Logic App public preview of runtime, you can write any JavaScript you want inside the workflow designer, which I think it's great. Besides that, we are looking into additional support for other languages. We ran a survey a few months back. The two top choice, I think, are C# and PowerShell. So we're looking into the feasibilities of supporting those. Again, if that's something that you care about, definitely go to the feedback link, aka.ms/LA feedback, and let us know which language you want for this feature.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'll say, I guess, at a meta level here about that, and about the question which I did find from Mike Stevenson about the data gateway, and do we see the kind of hybrid model moving away from that? I think it's the same. Somebody asked a question about Azure automation as well. Clearly there is overlap between these things, and we're actually working across teams to figure out what the right experiences is. So I wouldn't see these things as being competing with one another. We're literally working together to enable scenarios in the simplest possible way for what we're targeting. And I think the automation task is a great example of that. Is it's super simple. If you need the full power of automation runbooks, then Azure Automation is still going to be the place for you, right? But if you want to do some very simple quick actions, as Derek showed, an automation task is dramatically simpler than that. And so when we look at the inline code support in Logic Apps, we really love to add PowerShell to that because it kind of adds the capabilities to really blend these things together in the same way as the functions integration does. But keep us honest with this. It's like, where do you want to implement these things, and what's the friction in doing the types of automation scenarios you want? Because we can take this back across the teams and figure that out. But we do feel that by providing more language support and better functions, more and better functions integration, that we're actually going to enable a whole bunch of things that probably even fall outside of Azure Automation and other things by doing that in the Logic Apps Designer. And kind of, it's not directly related to that, but at least from a roadmap point of view, in terms of directionally what the new runtime enables, it is, which is like, well, what about the data gateway? I think we've heard from a lot of customers that they want more VNet connected connectors. So the data gateway clearly doesn't go away here. A lot of the cloud connectors depend on it. But I guess sharing some of our principles around which connectors we expect to light up next in the runtime are the ones that would access local resources like file and FTP, which kind of makes sense, right? If you want to run Logic Apps in your own environment, then you probably want access to all the resources in that local environment. So that's the kind of way we're thinking about this, which, yes, does give you options to do direct communication between systems, as you would probably want to do without having to use a data gateway to do that. We believe we can get faster and higher bandwidth throughput using VNets over the data gateway. But you tell us whether that makes sense. Because the choices will be there for you, and we'll watch, what you do with it, and then figure out whether there's anything else we need to do on top of that. But I would say really kind of think about, the performance characteristics that you're looking for, and tell us which connectors you need, because that's an active discussion in the team as well in terms of which ones we add next. Okay.
I will take one
else?
from Rodrigo on whether you can open more than one actions at the same time within the new designer. This is definitely a feedback that we have heard while designing the new experience. And you mentioned the exact scenario why when you would want it is to copy and paste values across different actions. So it's definitely something that we're looking into, and hopefully we'll be able to support soon in a few different ways, actually. We want to allow you to copy and paste an action as a whole. Very often you just want to do that and then tweak the values in the pasted action. Also, we're looking into the experience for you to be able to open more than one action at the same time, with panel maybe stacking on top of each other, so you can selectively bring in values from one to the other. So keep an eye out, and again, let us know if there's anything else you want in the new design or in the feedback tool.
Yeah, and we're nearly at the top of the hour, so we don't want to. We could probably talk for another hour or so, but I'm sure people have other things to do as well. So let's just see in the last minute whether there's anything else. Somebody's asking about Visual Studio. Why are we prioritizing VS Code over Visual Studio? It's kind of not that. I would say we need to do both, and we understand that. And actually, it's another active discussion we were literally having yesterday in the team in terms of updating support for Visual Studio for the kind of mapping tools and other things. And we've been made aware of some performance issues with Visual Studio as well. We are going to be working on it. Just be assured, it's not like we're going only to VS Code and there's no Visual Studio. We know we need to do both. So like now we've done the VS Code work, we'll be looking at Visual Studio and updating that as well. I can't tell you exactly when. It does take us longer. There is more development involved in doing that for VS Code, but we hope we can get something out sooner rather than later in terms of Visual Studio updates as well. And I think with that, I think we should probably wrap up. We can we'll keep on the chat and kind of answering your questions. So really appreciate everybody joining today. There's a whole bunch of people here. Thanks for taking time out of your day wherever you are. We promise we won't leave it this long next time. And please keep the feedback coming. we'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe.
Great stuff. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Divya. Thanks, Valerie and Chris as well on the questions. And thanks, everyone, for joining. See you next time.